Hello, everyone. Have you ever thought about how unsettling the silence around you can be when you're spending a night at a campsite? What about when you hear a sound in the dark, but can't see anyone? Now, think about this. Are you really alone? My channel is so close to reaching 500 subscribers. If you haven't subscribed yet, it's completely free and would mean a lot if you supported me. Let me know in the comments if you subscribed. I'll be dropping a heart on those comments. And don't forget to share this video. Attention! I share horror stories every day at 1500 hours PM. My name is Dylan, and this story is about how a camping trip turned into a nightmare. Last summer, I decided to go on a camping trip with 4 of my friends, Ava, Luke, Emma, and Ben, deep in the forest. There was an abandoned campsite in the heart of the woods, and no one had visited it for a long time. Naturally, that intrigued us. We set off on a Friday afternoon, and during the journey, everything seemed fine. By the late afternoon, we arrived at the campsite, and everything looked normal. It was eerily quiet, and all we could hear was the sound of the wind. We set up our tents and prepared dinner. Everything felt peaceful and calm, but something was off. There was a certain feeling, a vibe. It was too quiet. That night, we noticed something strange in the sky. The stars looked unusually bright, but they weren't ordinary stars. They seemed closer together, and then, suddenly, they started moving. At first, no one paid much attention. But then Luke said, "They're moving," and we all looked up at the sky. For a few seconds, the stars bizarrely came closer together and then spread apart again. We all thought it was strange, but couldn't find any explanation. Still, we decided to retire to our tents for the night. Throughout the night, when we woke up, we all felt that something was wrong. It felt as though something was watching us, even though it was so silent. Everything felt unnervingly tight and suffocating. The next morning, we decided to explore the campsite area. As we ventured further into the woods, we noticed something odd. The old stones between the trees seemed to have shifted. They formed a line, but it wasn't a natural shape. It felt like something had carefully placed them in that order. Ava said, "These look like they were placed by someone." But no matter how closely we looked, the stones didn't look old or new. They just felt strangely placed, like they belonged there for a reason. As we moved forward, we discovered old metal objects wedged between the stones. An old key, a necklace, and strange metal pieces marked with symbols. It felt like we had stumbled upon a grave or an old temple. Something was wrong, but we couldn't figure out what. We couldn't bring ourselves to go further. Deciding to turn back, we began walking away, but as we did, everything started to change. The air suddenly shifted. Then, from deep in the forest, we heard a strange sound. It was a soft, hissing sound, but it was getting closer. We couldn't see anyone, but the sound was growing louder. Then, a silhouette appeared. A deep, dark figure, floating in the air. As it moved, the air around it seemed to shift. In a few seconds, a figure emerged. The entity was strangely indistinct, impossible to see clearly, but it was certainly there. Its head was missing, leaving just a dark, empty space where the head should have been. The figure didn't move, but as we approached, it slowly took a step forward. Suddenly, we heard a scream. It was Emma's scream. We all rushed toward her, but no matter how fast we ran, her scream turned into an echo. We kept searching for Emma, but the dark figure vanished. We looked around, but we couldn't find any trace of her. We returned to the campsite to spend the night, but everything was deathly quiet. Only the faint rustling sounds from the forest remained. We woke up uneasily, and by morning, we decided to leave the campsite. But as we left the forest, something strange happened. Each of us found strange objects in our pockets. Old, unfamiliar objects, stones, and trinkets, like a key, an old necklace, and more. I can't forget that night. It felt as though something had followed us as we left the forest, and those objects we found are still with us, as if a part of us remained behind. We never returned to that old campsite. But every night, when I hear the wind rustling, I believe something is still there, waiting. If you like the story, like the video and get ready to listen to the other story. My name is Sean, and this is the story of the strangest and most terrifying camping experience I've ever had. Last summer, my friends Jamie, Kate, Lucas, and I decided to spend a few days in the depths of the forest, in a secluded and abandoned campsite. At first, everything seemed fine. We thought we were in for a peaceful and quiet vacation, surrounded by nature. But unexpectedly, everything changed. We arrived at the campsite and it was completely abandoned. Fallen trees, torn tents, and old campsite structures. Everything looked as if no one had been there for years. But we were excited to explore the place. After setting up our tents, we prepared dinner and sat around the fire. As night fell, the air grew cooler. At first, everything seemed calm, but as the night progressed, something started to feel off. As we sat around the fire, we started hearing a strange sound coming from deep in the forest. It was a rustling sound, but it seemed to be coming from something very far away. "It's probably an animal," said Jamie. But when we heard the sound getting closer, we all started to get nervous. We felt like something was watching us, and everyone fell silent. Suddenly, the sound stopped. The rustling and the hum of the wind disappeared. The stillness in the air was so thick, it felt like something was watching us. "This place feels weird," said Kate, and we all agreed. But we didn't know what was happening. The next morning, we decided to explore the area. As we ventured deeper into the forest, we noticed something odd. The stones among the trees seemed to have shifted, arranged in a pattern that didn't look natural. There was a trail left behind, as though something had placed them in a specific order. "These stones look like they've been placed by someone," Ava said. But no matter how closely we looked, the stones didn't seem old or new. They just seemed to be there, unnaturally arranged. As we moved forward, we found more objects hidden among the stones. An old key, a necklace, and strange metal pieces with symbols carved into them. It felt like we were in some sort of grave or ancient shrine. Something was wrong, but we couldn't put our finger on it. We didn't dare go any further. We decided to head back, but as we walked, everything began to change. The air suddenly shifted. Then, from the depths of the forest, we heard a strange sound. It was a faint, wheezing noise, like something or someone was moving toward us, but we couldn't see anyone. Suddenly, a shadow appeared. It was a deep, dark shape, like a floating figure in the air. As it moved, the air around it seemed to change. Within seconds, a figure began to materialize. It was strange, barely visible, but impossible to make out completely. It had no head, just a dark void in place of one. The figure didn't move, but as we got closer, it took a slow step forward. Then, we heard a scream. It was Emma's scream. We rushed to her, but no matter how fast we ran, the scream turned into nothing but an echo. We continued searching for Emma, but the dark figure disappeared just as suddenly as it had appeared. We looked around, but there was no trace of her. We returned to the campsite, but everything was eerily silent. Only the rustling sounds from the forest remained. We woke up uneasily and decided to leave the campsite the next morning. But as we left the forest, something strange happened. Everyone had something in their pockets. Old items, stones, and objects we didn't remember picking up, like a key, an old necklace, and more. I can't forget that night. It felt like something followed us out of the forest, something that still lingers within us. We never went back to that campsite. But every night, when I hear the wind rustling, I feel like something is still there with us. If this story drew you in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because sometimes nature is not as innocent as it seems. Hello, my name is Lily. Last year, I had a camping experience that I will never forget. Since that day, my perspective on nature has completely changed. This story is about the terrifying events that occurred during a few days I spent with my 4 friends in an abandoned forest. One weekend, my old friends Chloe, Jake, Olivia, and I decided to camp deep in the woods. Our goal was simple: to get away and spend a few days immersed in nature. However, this trip turned out to be anything but ordinary. When we arrived at the campsite, the surroundings were eerily quiet. The trees had grown wild, and some tents had collapsed. But there were signs that this had once been a popular camping spot. Many people had clearly visited in the past, but it seemed abandoned now. No one had set foot here in a long time, yet we were still filled with curiosity. We set up our tents and began preparing dinner. As night fell, the temperature dropped quickly. Slowly, strange sounds started to come from the depths of the forest. At first, it sounded like the wind whistling, but soon we realized the sounds had a rhythm. It was as though someone was singing some kind of song. Chloe said, "This is really strange. It sounds like some kind of ritual song." After listening more carefully, Jake remarked, "The sound seemed to be coming from far away." We decided to follow the sound. Though we were all a bit nervous, our curiosity outweighed the fear. We left the campsite and ventured into the forest. As we walked deeper, we noticed the sound had stopped. Suddenly, everything became eerily quiet. Out of nowhere, we stumbled upon an old stone structure. It seemed lost in the forest, almost like it had been swallowed by time. The place was abandoned, but the walls were covered with strange symbols. These weren't normal markings, they looked otherworldly. Jake said, "This could be an ancient temple." But none of us truly believed it. We decided to go inside, but with each step, a sense of unease crept over me. As we ventured deeper, we saw more odd and unfamiliar objects scattered around. Among a pile of stones, we found an old bottle. It contained a dark, crimson liquid. Olivia asked, "What could this be?" Jake picked it up to examine it closely. Suddenly, a strange light began to glow from within the bottle. We all jumped back in alarm. At that moment, a sound came from deep within the structure. It was like a scream, but it sounded muffled, as though someone was drowning. We tried to figure out where it came from, but then we noticed something approaching. A figure started to emerge from the shadows. It had no head, and its body was almost translucent. With every step, the air around it seemed to distort. We were paralyzed with fear. Then, another scream echoed through the air, this time Jake's scream. We rushed towards him, but by the time we found him, he was gone. All that remained was a faint trail leading deeper into the forest. Panicking, we decided to leave, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us. When we returned to the campsite, everything was quiet. There was no crackling fire or the sound of the wind. We retreated to our tents, but I was so anxious that I couldn't sleep. It was almost impossible to distinguish between what was real and what was just a trick of the mind. The next morning, when I woke up, I felt a strange emptiness inside. Everything felt off. When we went to check the campsite, we noticed something odd. There were old stones and objects around the area that we hadn't seen before. I found an old key among a pile of stones. Suddenly, a memory flashed in my mind. Had one of those stones been there before we discovered the structure? That day, we fled the campsite in terror. On the drive back to town, I noticed that Olivia and Chloe had also found strange objects in their pockets. The things we saw that night had come back with us. But I had no desire to ever see that structure or that forest again. Still, every night when the wind howls, I feel as though those strange entities are still watching us. If this story affected you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Sometimes, even in nature, the truth of fear is hidden. Hello, my name is Ethan. This story is about the terrifying events I experienced while camping with my friends. Many people consider campgrounds in the forest to be peaceful and safe, but after that day, I realized that forests are not as innocent as they seem. One weekend, my closest friends Maya, Tom, Lily, and I decided to go camping at an abandoned campsite outside our town. No one had stepped foot here for years because the campsite had been closed down long ago. But we thought it would be a peaceful and mysterious place. When we arrived at the campsite, the surroundings were eerily quiet. As night fell, traces of a lost past remained, with old structures and abandoned artifacts scattered here and there. We set up our tents and began spending the evening around the campfire. Amid our cheerful conversations and laughter, everything seemed normal. However, as the night wore on, a strange unease began to settle in the air. Maya said, "It's so quiet here, not even the sound of birds." We all fell silent for a moment. With the deepening night, we began to hear a strange hum from a distance. At first, we thought it was the wind, but the hum didn't stop. Tom said, "This is really weird." But none of us dared to go outside. After a while, we decided to try to sleep, but none of us could close our eyes. It felt like something was watching us, a presence that we couldn't see. Suddenly, we heard a loud noise in front of our tent. We all rushed outside and couldn't believe our eyes. There was an old arrow stuck in the ground, and at the tip of the arrow, there was blood. We quickly pulled back. Tom muttered, "What's this arrow doing here?" It could have belonged to an ancient warrior from the forest, but why was it in an abandoned campsite? At that moment, the stars in the sky seemed to disappear, and the sky turned completely dark. The trees around us looked even more terrifying. The next morning, we decided to leave the campsite. However, we noticed strange footprints around the campsite. Right outside Tom's tent, there were human-like footprints that we didn't recognize. We all exchanged frightened glances and hurriedly packed our things. But something caught my attention by the riverbank, an old rock with an inscription. The writing was almost worn out, but part of it was still legible. It read, "Don't approach, don't stay the night, or you'll disappear." We soon began to leave the campsite, but we felt like something was wrong. Sounds were coming from deep within the forest. It wasn't the sound of animals, but something, or someone, was following us. We walked slowly, and with every step, I felt like we were being watched. We hurried back to town, but even after we left the forest, I still felt a shadow trailing behind us. It felt like a presence was still following us, just as the inscription by the river had warned. Since that day, I've never gone near that dark part of the forest again. I always feel like something is watching us. If this story had an impact on you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because sometimes, even in nature, fear hides in the depths.